You're driving through your neighborhood in 2026, right? And you hit one speed bump. One. And your entire car screams at you like a rusty metal bed frame being dragged across a concrete floor in a condemned building. That sound, that ungodly, high-pitched, agonizing squeal that shoots through your spine and makes every single person on the sidewalk turn their head and stare at you like you're piloting a shopping cart full of scrap metal down the highway. You feel it in your chest, you feel it in your dignity. Every single bump, every single dip in the road, every time you turn the steering wheel, every time you even shift your weight getting in and out of the car, this banshee wail erupts from underneath your vehicle and announces to the entire world that something is catastrophically, horrifyingly wrong with your suspension. So what do? You do what any reasonable person does in 2026 when their car sounds like it's being tortured. You drive it carefully, white-knuckling the steering wheel, straight to the nearest shop. And the technician, this guy in the clean polo shirt behind the service counter, he doesn't even need to put it on the lift. He hears it. He nods slowly. He gives you that look, that rehearsed, sympathetic, funeral director look, and then he hits you with it. Sir, your ball joints inside the upper and lower control arms have collapsed. The rubber bushings are physically tearing apart. The metal interfaces have seized. We need to replace the entire upper and lower control arm assemblies, the stabilizer end links, and honestly, while we're in there, we should probably do the struts too, and the number. The number that flashes on that little screen. $1,500. Parts and labor. For a car that was driving perfectly fine yesterday except for the fact that it now sounds like a haunted house. $1,500 because of a sound. Not a wobble, not a pull, not a death rattle in the steering, a sound. And I am here today to tell you, to prove to you with basic physics and decades of mechanical engineering history, that in the vast majority of these cases, that $1,500 diagnosis is a carefully constructed, highly profitable lie. And the actual fix, the real fix, the fix that master mechanics in Japanese racing garages have known about for decades, costs you $1. One single dollar. A medical syringe from a pharmacy. That is the video you are about to watch. The dealerships making billions off your suspension panic want you to think ball and socket joints are untouchable black box sorcery that only their proprietary scan tools and certified technicians can diagnose. They are not. It is basic adhesive friction, acoustic resonance, and elastomer hardening. 3 concepts you can understand in the next 10 minutes that will save you from being gutted financially by a service industry that has turned the sound of a dry rubber boot into a $1,500 profit center. But as always, I am sharing this old-school racing secret for educational purposes because that is what this channel has always been about, giving you the mechanical literacy that the service industry prays you never develop. Now let me teach you exactly what is happening underneath your car, because once you understand the architecture, the scam falls apart completely. Your vehicle's front suspension is built around a component called the control arm. Think of it as a heavy, forged steel lever that connects your wheel assembly to the chassis of the car. On most modern vehicles, you have an upper control arm and a lower control arm, and together they allow your wheel to move up and down over bumps while keeping the tire planted on the road. At the end of each control arm, where it connects to the steering knuckle, sits the ball joint. And this is the part the Stealership wants you to be terrified of. A ball joint is literally what the name says. It is a polished, induction-hardened steel ball sitting inside a matching steel socket. That is it. It is the same fundamental engineering principle as your shoulder joint or your hip joint, a sphere rotating inside a cup. This design allows the wheel to move in multiple axes simultaneously. It can pivot up and down for suspension travel, it can rotate left and right for steering input, and it can handle the complex compound angles that happen when you turn the wheel while going over a bump at the same time. Japanese engineers at companies like Toyota and Honda have been perfecting this ball and socket geometry for over half a century. The metallurgy on these components is extraordinary. The steel ball is typically induction hardened, which means the surface has been heat treated to an incredibly high Rockwell hardness rating, while the core remains slightly softer and more ductile, giving you a component that resists surface wear while also resisting cracking under impact loads. These things are built to last 200,000 miles, 300,000 miles on a well-maintained vehicle. The ball itself almost never fails. Read that again. The forged, hardened steel ball almost never fails. So what does fail? One single component, the dust boot. That is it. Wrapped around the ball joint assembly is a small, flexible rubber cover shaped like an accordion or a tiny bellows. This is the dust boot. Its job is stupidly simple. It keeps road grit, water, and debris out of the ball and socket interface, and it keeps a small reservoir of lubricating grease sealed inside the joint, pressed against the ball and socket surfaces. That is the entire system. Hardened steel ball, hardened steel socket, a smear of grease, and a rubber boot to keep it all sealed. And the rubber boot is the single point of failure in the entire assembly. If you are learning something right now that no mechanic has ever explained to you, I need you to do something for me. Hit the like button. I am serious. If you are tired of auto shops trying to sell you 2 forged steel control arms because of 1 dry rubber boot, smash that like button right now because the algorithm buries this kind of content. They do not want you finding a $1 fix when there is a $1,500 repair order on the line. And tell me in the comments right now, does your car squeak over bumps? What did a dealership try to charge you to fix it? I want to see those numbers. I want to build a database of exactly how much money the suspension replacement industry is extracting from people who just needed a thimble of grease. Now let me show you how the Stealership scam actually works mechanically, because this is where it gets infuriating. You walk in with a squeaky car. The technician puts it on the lift. He grabs the wheel and wiggles it. He pushes on the control arm. And here is what he knows but will never tell you. He knows the ball joint has no play. He knows there is no clunking, no knocking, no lateral movement in the joint. The steel ball is sitting perfectly snug in its socket. The component is structurally sound, but it squeaks. And the squeak is all he needs. Because in 2026, with parts prices inflated beyond anything we saw even 3 years ago, a complete upper and lower control arm replacement with new bushings and new stabilizer end links is a goldmine repair order. We are talking $400 to $600 just in parts for a mid-range sedan, double that for an SUV or a truck, and then you stack the labor on top. 6 to 8 hours of build shop time at $150 to $200 an hour. That is where the $1,500 comes from. And what are they actually replacing? They are unbolting heavy forged steel control arms with perfectly functional ball joints, throwing them in the scrap bin, and installing brand new assemblies that come with fresh rubber boots filled with fresh grease. They are literally replacing the entire structural skeleton of your front suspension to deliver the same result as injecting a tiny amount of grease through the old boot. It is like demolishing your entire kitchen because a single cabinet hinge started squeaking. The hinge needed a drop of oil. Instead, they sold you a full renovation. That is the control arm scam. That is the business model. And in 2026, when people are already stretched to the breaking point financially, when grocery bills have doubled, when insurance premiums are through the roof, this kind of predatory diagnostic exploitation is not just dishonest, it is cruel. So, what is actually causing the sound? Let me get into the molecular level here, because this is where the whole scam unravels and you will never be fooled again. The dust boot is made of an elastomer material. Elastomers are a category of polymers that have elastic properties, meaning they can stretch, flex, and deform, and then return to their original shape. Rubber is the most common elastomer. Now, here is the critical thing about elastomers that the service industry absolutely does not want you to understand. Elastomers degrade over time through a process that material scientists call age hardening. Exposure to heat cycling from the engine bay, UV radiation from sunlight hitting the undercarriage, ozone in the atmosphere, and the constant mechanical flexing as the suspension travels up and down, all of these factors cause the polymer chains in the rubber to cross-link excessively. When those polymer chains over-cross-link, the rubber loses its elasticity. It gets stiff, it gets hard. It goes from being a soft, flexible, self-lubricating boot that slides smoothly against the ball joint housing to being a rigid, dry, almost plastic-like shell that grinds against the metal. At the same time, the small amount of grease that was packed inside the boot during manufacturing is slowly evaporating and degrading. Grease is not permanent. It has a service life. In a sealed ball joint boot, depending on the climate and driving conditions, that grease can break down and dry out in 5 to 7 years. So now you have the perfect storm. The rubber boot has hardened from elastomer degradation. The grease has evaporated. And you have a situation where hardened, dry rubber is rubbing directly against polished steel surfaces with zero lubrication in between. That single millimeter of dry contact area, rubber on steel with no grease buffer, generates what acousticians call stick-slip friction. The rubber catches on the steel, builds up elastic tension, then snaps free, catches again, snaps free again, thousands of times per second as the suspension moves. That rapid stick-slip cycle produces high-frequency acoustic resonance. That is your squeak. That is the sound of a dying bed frame coming from your car. Not catastrophic metal failure. Not a disintegrating ball joint. Not a collapsing control arm. Dry rubber on dry steel. Friction. That is it. And the fix is not to replace the steel. The fix is to reintroduce lubrication between the rubber and the steel. Here is the $1 syringe hack, step by step. And please listen carefully, because safety comes first in every single thing we do on this channel. First, you need to lift the car. You must use a proper hydraulic floor jack to raise the vehicle, and then you must immediately place rated jack stands under the designated frame support points before you go underneath. I cannot stress this enough. Do not ever, ever get under a vehicle supported only by a hydraulic jack. Hydraulic jacks fail, seals blow out, release valves slip, people die. Jack stands are mandatory. This is non-negotiable. Once the car is safely supported on jack stands, you get underneath and you locate the ball joints on the upper and lower control arms. You will see the rubber dust boot. It looks like a small accordion-shaped rubber cover wrapped around the joint where the control arm meets the steering knuckle. Inspect it. If the boot is cracked, torn wide open, or physically missing chunks of rubber, stop. That joint is contaminated with road debris and the ball itself may be damaged. That is a legitimate replacement scenario. But if the boot is intact, just dry and hardened, which is the case the vast majority of the time, you proceed with the injection. Go to any pharmacy and buy a large gauge medical syringe with a needle. We are talking about a standard syringe, the kind used for livestock or industrial applications, with a thick enough needle to handle viscous material. It will cost you about $1. Fill the syringe with a high-quality synthetic grease. I recommend a polyurea-based synthetic grease because it has exceptional high-temperature stability and water resistance, but a standard lithium complex grease will also work. Carefully insert the needle through the rubber dust boot. You want to pierce through the thickest part of the boot, not through an already thin or cracked section. Push the needle in until you feel it pass through the rubber wall and enter the cavity where the ball and socket interface sits. Now slowly depress the plunger and inject the grease into the cavity. You will see the boot start to swell slightly as the grease fills the dry space inside. Inject until you feel moderate resistance or see the boot bulge slightly. Do not over-inject to the point of rupturing the boot. Remove the needle carefully. Now some mechanics will take a tiny dab of RTV silicone sealant and place it over the needle puncture hole to reseal the boot. That is good practice, and I recommend it. It takes 10 seconds and prevents future contamination through that pinhole. Now lower the car and drive it about a mile at low speed over some gentle bumps. What you are doing is allowing the suspension to cycle through its travel, which massages and distributes the freshly injected grease across the entire ball and socket contact surface and the interior surface of the rubber boot. Within that first mile, that horrifying, life-ruining $1,500 squeak will vanish. Your suspension will be whisper quiet. The ball joint you were told needed emergency replacement will feel brand new. $1, one syringe, 5 minutes of actual work. Now I have to be dead serious with you for a moment because I love this community, and I will never put any of you in danger for the sake of saving money. This syringe hack works specifically for the friction squeak caused by a dry dust boot on an otherwise structurally sound ball joint. If your ball joint has actual mechanical play, meaning you can grab the wheel and feel it clunk or knock, meaning there is lateral or vertical movement in the joint when you pry on it with a bar, no amount of grease injection will fix that. A worn ball joint with play is a genuine safety hazard. If that joint separates while you are driving, the wheel folds under the car, and you lose all steering control at highway speed. That is a real replacement scenario, and you should absolutely get it done. Also, handle the syringe and needle safely. These are medical sharps. Cap the needle immediately after use. Dispose of it properly in a rigid container. Do not leave it on your garage floor where a child or a pet can step on it. And always wear safety glasses when working under a vehicle. Debris falls, rust flakes off, protect your eyes. Subscribe and hit the bell right now before the suspension parts manufacturing lobby figures out that a single syringe and 5 cents worth of grease is making their $1,500 control arm replacement kits obsolete. And make sure you are following the secondary channel linked in the featured section below because we are going deeper on every single one of these Stealerships scams and we are just getting started. I will see you in the next